Dear members of the committee, I see quorum. I'm sorry to interrupt. Dear members of the committee. Yeah, it is. Dear members of the committee, honorable members. Honorable members, I see a quorum. We listen to a lot of fabulous. Are we ready to start? I see a quorum. Thank you very much. Sorry to interrupt you. I must inform the members that the clerk of the committee can only receive motions for the election of chair. The clerk cannot receive any other types of motions, cannot entertain points of orders, nor participate in debate. We can now proceed to the election of chair. Pursuant to Standing Order 1062, the chair must be a member of the government party. I am ready to receive motions of the chair. Mr. Baker.
I'd like to nominate Peter Fonseca as chair.
It has been moved by Mr. Baker that Mr. Fonseca be elected as chair of the committee. Are there any further motions? I declare the motion carried and Mr. Fonseca do elected chair of the committee. Mr. Fonseca, you can come to the head of the table.
Get my earpiece on here. Okay, thank you. Okay. Plug in here. First, just let me take a moment, Clerk, to thank my colleagues. Thanks for your support. It's wonderful to be here. I know this is a very important committee on the Hill, and to see many here. I know some have sat on this committee in the past. Some of the veterans, I'll call. I know Julie. I know Pierre. Sometimes in the past, of course, Gabrielle has been on the committee. I don't know if I'm missing anybody. We've got the critics from all three parties, but it's really an honor to be able to preside over this committee. And thank you very much, everybody, for your support. So I look forward to the work that we're going to be doing here on behalf of Canada and Canadians. Yep. I recognize, yes, Ms. Zerwitz.
Mr. Chair, congratulations.
Thank you.
I wanted to know whether we are ready to discuss and go through routine motions.
Yeah, Ms. Zerwitz, I just have to go through. The clerk has provided me some notes here, so that and I'll just commence, and then I'll bring you in. If the committee is in agreement, I invite the clerk to proceed with the election of the vice chair. So we're going to go to the vice chairs right now, Ms. Zerwitz, and then we will get to routine motions.
Thank you very much,
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, with your permission, Mr. Chair, I would like to nominate Greg McLean as the vice chair.
It's Greg McLean.
It has been moved by Mr. Poilievre that Mr. McLean be elected first vice chair of the committee. Is there any other motions? I declare Mr. McLean duly elected second vice chair of the committee. Pursuant to Standing Order 1062, the second vice chair must be a member of the opposition party other than that of the official opposition. I am now prepared to receive motions for the second vice chair. Madame Châtel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Congratulations on your election. I would like to nominate as a second chair Monsieur Gabriel Sainte-Marie.
Il est proposé par Madame Châtel que Monsieur Sainte-Marie soit.
It is proposed by Ms. Châtel that Monsieur Sainte-Marie be elected.
Chair of the committee.
Thank you very much, Clerk, and congratulations to our vice chairs. And we also have our PS, Terry Beach, is also a member of the committee. Well, welcome to meeting number 1 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. The proceedings will be made available via House of Commons website. For your awareness, the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entire committee. Today's meeting is also taking place using the webinar format. Webinars are for public committee meetings and are available only to members, their staff, and witnesses. Members enter immediately as active participants. All functionalities for active participants remain the same. Staff will be non-active participants and can therefore only view the meeting in gallery view. I would like to take this opportunity to remind all participants to this meeting that screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. Given the ongoing pandemic situation, in light of the recommendations from health authorities, as well as the directive of the Board of Internal Economy on October 19, 2021, to remain healthy and safe, all those attending the meeting in person are to maintain 2-meter physical distancing, must wear a non-medical mask when circulating in the room, and it is highly recommended that the mask be worn at all times, including when seated. Must maintain proper hand hygiene by using the provided hand sanitizer at the room entrance. As the chair, I will enforce these measures for the duration of the meeting, and I thank members in advance for their cooperation. To ensure an orderly meeting, I would like to outline a few rules to follow. 1, for members participating on Zoom, you may speak in official language of your choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. If interpretation is lost, please inform me immediately, and I will ensure interpretation is promptly restored before resuming the proceedings. The raise hand feature at the bottom of the screen can be used at any time if you wish to speak or to alert the chair. 2, for members participating in person, you may proceed as usual. And would the whole committee is meet and when the as usually would when the whole committee is meeting in person in the committee room. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you are on Zoom, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. For the members in the room, your microphone will be controlled as usual by the proceedings and verification officer. When speaking, number 4, please speak slowly, clearly. When you are not speaking, please ensure that your microphone is on mute. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. Regarding the speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do the best we can to maintain a consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether participating virtually or in person. And then other business. I would now suggest that as the next order of business that the committee now proceed to consideration of routine motions. In preparation for this, the committee clerk has circulated a list of routine motions that the committee adopted in the last parliamentary session. The committee clerk can also answer any questions about the routine motions that you may have. Now I'm going to recognize Ms. Zarowitz.
Thank you.
And I apologize. I did see Mr. Beach's hand go up. So, Mr. Beach?
Yeah, sorry. I got excited. I have a motion. Can't do it without routine motion. So if you just add me the name of that list whenever the appropriate time is, I'd like to be on that list. Thank you.
Clerk, how it is? Yeah. So we'll recognize you as soon as we're done with the routine motions. Thank you.
Okay, so I will read into the record the routine motions. So the first one is that the committee retain as needed and at the discretion of the chair the services of one or more analysts from the Library of Parliament to assist in its work. Do we need to vote on each one, or do we vote at the very end, Mr. Chair?
It's committee's choice, clerk says so, and I guess I will look for agreement from everybody, and if I could just see a nodding of heads. Yeah, it looks like we're good. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Go. That the subcommittee on agenda and procedure be established and be composed of 5 members, the chair, 1 member from each recognized party, and that the subcommittee work in a spirit of collaboration. That the chair be authorized to hold meetings to receive evidence and to have that evidence published when a quorum is not present, provided that at least 4 members are present, including 2 members of the opposition parties and 2 members of the government party. But when traveling outside the parliamentary precinct, that the meeting begin after 15 minutes, regardless of members present. That witnesses be given 5 minutes for their opening statement, that whenever possible, witnesses provide the committee with their opening statement 72 hours in advance, and at the discretion of the chair, during the questioning of witnesses, there be allocated 6 minutes for the first questioner of each party as follows for the first round: Conservative Party, followed by Liberal Party, Bloc Québécois, New Democratic Party. For the second and subsequent rounds, the order and time for questioning be as follows: Conservative Party, 5 minutes, Liberal Party, 5 minutes, Bloc Québécois, 2.5 minutes, New Democratic Party, 2.5 minutes, Conservative Party, 5 minutes, Liberal Party, 5 minutes. That only the clerk of the committee be authorized to distribute documents to members of the committee, provided the documents are in both official languages, and that the witnesses be advised accordingly. That the clerk of the committee, at the discretion of the chair, be authorized to make the necessary arrangements to provide working meals for the committee and its subcommittees. That if requested, reasonable travel, accommodation, and living expenses be reimbursed to witnesses not exceeding 2 representatives per organization, and that in exceptional circumstances, payment for more representatives be made at the discretion of the chair. That unless otherwise ordered, each committee member be allowed to be accompanied by 1 staff member at in-camera meetings, and that 1 additional person from each House officer's office be allowed to be present. That 1 copy of the transcript of each in-camera meeting be kept in the committee clerk's office for consultation by members of the committee or by their staff, and that the analysts assigned to the committee also have access to the in-camera transcripts. That the 48-hour notice, interpreted as 2 nights, be required for any substantive motion to be moved in committee, unless the substantive motion relates directly to business, then under consideration, provided that the notice be filed with the clerk of the committee no later than 4 p.m. from Monday to Friday. B, the motion be distributed to members and the offices of the whips of each recognized party in both official languages by the clerk on the same day the said notice was transmitted, if it was received no later than the deadline hour. C, notices received after the deadline hour or on non-business days be deemed to have been received during the next business day, and that when the committee is holding meetings outside of the parliamentary precinct, no substantive motion may be moved. That in relation to orders of reference from the House respecting bills, A, the clerk of the committee shall, upon the committee receiving such an order of reference, write to each member who is not a member of the caucus represented on the committee to invite those members to file with the clerk of the committee in both official languages any amendments to the bill, which is the subject of the said order, which they would suggest that the committee consider. B, suggested amendments filed pursuant to paragraph A at least 48 hours prior to the start of clause-by-clause consideration of the bill to which the amendments relate shall be deemed to be proposed during the said consideration, provided that the committee may, by motion, vary this deadline in respect of a given bill. And C, during the clause-by-clause consideration of a bill, the chair shall allow a member who filed suggested amendments pursuant to paragraph A an opportunity to make brief representations in support of them. That the clerk inform each witness who is to appear before the committee that the House Administration support team must conduct technical tests to check the connectivity and the equipment used to ensure the best possible sound quality, and that the chair advise the committee at the start of each meeting of any witness who did not perform the required technical tests. That all documents submitted for committee business that do not come from a federal department, member's office, or that have not been translated by the Translation Bureau be sent for prior linguistic review by the Translation Bureau before being distributed to members. And that completes the routine motions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Zarowitz. I think we are all in favor. I saw everybody nodding favorably. Great. So we are done with those routine motions, Clerk. And I believe that Mr. Beach wanted the floor.
Mr. Chair, just for clarification, I believe, so now that we're in committee business, I have submitted a motion in French and English to the clerk. Has that been distributed?
The clerk has not received it as of yet.
Do we have copies that we can distribute? Please. If it pleases everyone, I can read it while it's being distributed. Does that work?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, I would move that pursuant to the motion adopted in the House on Thursday, December 2nd, the Standing Committee on Finance proceed to the consideration of Bill C2, an act to provide further support in response to COVID-19, and that A, the committee direct the chair to, resources permitting, schedule extended meetings for the purpose of studying the bill. B, the committee invite departmental officials from relevant departments to appear Tuesday, December 7th. C, that further witnesses be submitted to the clerk in an ordered list by 10 a.m. on Tuesday, December 7th. D, that the committee invite the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance to appear for 2 hours in addition to the length of her opening remarks on Thursday, December 9th. E, that all amendments to the bill be submitted to the clerk of the committee before 3 p.m. on Thursday, December 9th. And F, that the committee commence clause-by-clause consideration of Bill C2 no later than Friday, December 10th. That's the full motion, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Beach. Discussion, Mr. Polyev.
Sorry. Someone else first? No. Oh, it's me. Yes, I think the F is problematic. December 10th does not leave us a lot of time to properly do our work. This is another $7 billion of expenditures. The 10th is Friday, so we basically get less than a week. Today's gone, so we're getting 3 days for $7 billion of new spending. This after it has come to light that organized criminals profited off of the CERB, that wealthy executives and shareholders inadvertently profited off of subsidies that were intended for wage earners, that prisoners received CERB payments, that ESDC officials got instructions from ministers to keep paying out the CERB even in cases where they suspected fraud. And also when there's 1 million vacant jobs. The government's been paying people not to work while there's 1 million jobs unfilled. So Conservatives are not prepared to simply ram through another $7 billion of expenditures. If this was such an urgent matter, then the Prime Minister wouldn't have shut Parliament down for half a year. This is our first Finance Committee meeting since June. It's now December. So the government's bad planning is not everyone else's emergency. They shut down Parliament for the whole summer, didn't need to do that. Prorogued earlier on, didn't need to do that. Called an unnecessary election, didn't need to do that. And then they waited another 2 months after getting back up to reconvene Parliament. Didn't need to do that. And now they say they're in a rush. Well, I mean, you know, when you show up to work for the first time after a 6-month break and say that you're behind schedule and expect all your coworkers to scramble to clean up your mess, don't be surprised if they say, whoa, wait a minute here. Let's look into the details, especially given how many mistakes this government has made with our tax dollars in the last year and a half. So I would propose we simply remove F and we allow the committee to decide when its study is concluded. Once we've heard enough witnesses, we've done enough scrutiny, and the majority of committee members are happy to proceed to a decision, then we could move to conclude testimony and begin clause by clause in order to send the House the piece of legislation back.
Thank you, Mr. Polyev. I do have a speaking order here, and I've got Monsieur Sainte-Marie next, and then I've got Mr. McLean, Mr. Baker, and Ms. Zarowitz after that. And speaking to the motion, yes, to the motion that is before us on C2. Monsieur Sainte-Marie.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and congratulations for your nomination. So we're looking at the motion in general right now and not the amendment proposed by Mr. Polyev. Is that correct? Okay.
Mr. Polyev, did you put that forward as an amendment, or was that just a statement, a comment? What were you doing there?
It was just a statement. I would like to be
Okay.
back on the list to formally move the amendment.
But it was not moved as you did not move an amendment.
I did not move an amendment
Okay,
yet.
so okay.
OK, c'est bien compris. Merci. Je commencerai en...
Okay, perfect. So I would like to start by saying that I am concerned by what my colleague has stated regarding the urgency to act. There are companies, a lot of businesses in tourism and the culture sectors that are depending on public support and wage subsidies. And we have a duty to study this in depth with the arguments shared by my colleague. We need to examine this. It's unfortunate that since the election, 2 months have passed, and that it's only today that the committee has been reconvened, and I hope things will go well. So I would like to say that the government did not act fast enough, but I also recognize the importance of acting quickly for businesses that need the support of the programs in place. So this will be a challenge for all of us. We'll have to, unfortunately, correct the government's laziness, quote unquote. And I will have a comment on the amendment that was proposed with more details. I have a few points that I would like to raise, and perhaps that Mr. Beach could respond. Firstly, would it have been possible to have the Minister of Finance tomorrow with us instead of Thursday? Why would she not be available as of tomorrow? Usually, when we're studying bills, the minister is present. They're present right at the start of the study so that they can talk about the bill, and it allows us to have answers to the questions that we ask before we move on to other witnesses. I had said to certain government members that I was interested in hearing from Pablo Rodriguez, the Heritage Minister. In Quebec, we are quite concerned with freelance workers, contract workers, and I would like to have a confirmation from the Heritage Minister if he could come in front of the committee. It could be at the same time as the Minister of Finance. Also, in the list of witnesses, I think that it's an important part of our study, and at the block, we would want to have at least 2 witnesses. That's the smallest number that we can propose. If we could have more witnesses, that would be even better. But before voting on the motion, I would like to receive that confirmation. So let me summarize. Would it be possible to have the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Heritage Tuesday instead of Thursday? Could we guarantee as well that the bloc would have at minimum 2 witnesses to propose? So those were my 2 questions. And I will wait for your response. Thank you.
I know Mr. Beach is on the list, but next we've got Mr. McLean, Mr. Baker, Ms. Zarowitz, Mr. Blakey, Mr. Polyev again, and then Mr. Beach. Mr. McLean.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and congratulations. And
Thank you.
Sorry I haven't.
And to you.
And I haven't met many of my colleagues here face to face because I've only been in Parliament for 2 years, and 3/4 of that we've been meeting virtually. So nice to meet you all, and thanks for the introductions, and congratulations again. I'm going to support some of the words said by my colleague, Mr. Polyev here. Logistically, what we're being asked to do here is to come up with a list of people that we want to hear on this, and some of that list you want to already hear tomorrow, and our list isn't even going to be prepared until tomorrow. The relevant departments, of course, are going to be determined in our discussions here. And I think we're really jamming this logistically in order to meet an end goal, which is too pressed. We have to actually go through the actual process here. And the public expects us to go through this process of actually looking at this bill, hearing from people that are impacted by this bill, hearing what the minister has to say, as my colleague, Mr. St. Maria, said first and foremost about why we need to move on this bill as quickly as we do. And there are some good reasons why we need to move quickly. But there's also some good reasons, I suppose, why we've sat and waited so long to look at it in the first place and bring Parliament back to address what might be missing. So I do think we are logistically pressed here, and I would agree that we have to make sure that December 10th is not the end here, that we actually do look at the full spectrum of what we need to do here and stretch that so we can actually have some people come here with the appropriate warning, with the appropriate presentation materials, so we can ask them the questions that are required to be answered here. Thank you.
To you. Thank you. And we're going to now go to Mr. Baker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Congratulations on your election, and congratulations to Mr. McLean and Mr. Saint-Marie pour votre élection aussi. Je voulais commencer par...
I wanted to start by saying that what Mr. Beach proposed is quite responsible. He proposed the 10th of December for the clause by clause, and I think that it's important that we be ready to work on the clause by clause by that date.
If we don't set a timeline for this committee's work to get to the clause by clause process, then we risk not getting this legislation passed in a timely manner, or consideration done in a timely manner at the very least. Certainly when we get to clause by clause, any member can choose to propose amendments. They can choose to vote for or against certain clauses. That's their right, of course. But it's important that we get to that stage in time so that the committee can consider the bill and pass it in whatever form the committee chooses to pass it in time that we can get these programs out to folks who need them. I do think that there are these benefits are critical to those who are struggling or will be struggling in the future, whether that be individuals or businesses. As you can see from the legislation, the supports for individuals and businesses that are proposed here are for those who are really facing tremendous hardship, for significant revenue declines for business, for people who are under public health orders and the like. And I think it would be unfortunate if this committee couldn't set a timeline that was expeditious to ensure that the legislation was considered quickly and that a decision by this committee, whatever that decision may happen to be, is made in a timeline that allows folks to get the help that they need when they need it. I would hate to have to go back to people in my community in Etobicoke Centre or Canadians in other parts of the country and have to say that we weren't willing to work at the most expeditious pace reasonably possible to consider this legislation. I think December 10th provides for it's an expedited timeline, there's no question, but I think it's needed given there are so many folks out there who are struggling. Those are my thoughts, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you for those. And we've next Ms. Zarowitz and then Mr. Blakey after.
Okay. I'm struggling with my mask and everything else here. Anyways, thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I think to address Mr. Poilievre's comments, I agree it's not ideal that we pass these types of legislation in a short period of time. I don't think that anybody would prefer this type of a short timeline. I think the reality is that we've seen over the last almost 2 years is that we've had to do so because of the urgency and the unpredictability of this pandemic. I also do not agree that we are trying to ram through this legislation. And with the greatest respect to my colleague from the Bloc Québécois, we are not lazy in any way. What I think we would be willing to propose is to work at every opportunity this week to make sure that we take every opportunity of committee time for us to be able to ensure that we have the right witnesses, we have the time to ask the questions, we have the time to meet with officials, we have the time to meet with the minister, we have the time to actually go through this bill in as deep a manner as possible and as quickly as possible. I agree with my colleague, Mr. Baker. It is important for us to have a timeline. It is important for us to pass this before we rise for the winter session. As everyone knows, or as most of us know, existing supports ended November 20th. We also know that the recovery has been uneven. We know that the hardest hit industries need our support. We also know that the public health situation remains uncertain and unpredictable, particularly now that we've got Omicron. And I think it's very, very important for us to be considering this excellent bill. There is a series of measures that if certain parts of our country have to go into lockdown, that both businesses and individuals would have access to lockdown support. So it is urgent that we do look to see if we can reach an agreement on a timeline that would allow us to properly study this bill, properly ask the questions in an expedited manner, but also allow us that before we rise for the winter session, that we pass this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Zarowitz. And now to Mr. Blakey.
Thank you very much. So just a few thoughts that I'd like to put on the record for the benefit of the committee. Maybe start just by responding to Ms. Zarowitz, who said that, because of the pandemic, we've often had to pass legislation in an expedited fashion. I would submit that while that might have been true at the very beginning of the pandemic, in fact, Parliament has been called to pass legislation expeditiously, normally to protect the government from scrutiny. The government has often waited until the last minute to present their bills when they could have been sharing information, having conversations with other parties well in advance of when they tabled the legislation. And in many cases also could have been convening Parliament much earlier. We've often heard a united cry from opposition parties to convene Parliament, whether that was in the fall of 2020 when the Prime Minister instead chose to prorogue, or whether it was this fall when the Prime Minister first chose to have an unnecessary election and then chose to wait a long time to recall Parliament. So, that's not because of the pandemic. That's because of decisions made by the Prime Minister, which I think the evidence suggests he made accounting for his own personal and his party's political interests rather than the interests of Canadians who have been depending on support from the government in order to make it through the pandemic, who would have been much better served by having Parliament be able to spend more time on these issues. So I'd start with that as just sort of a cautionary note to Canadians who are listening to understand that, in fact, there have been a lot of choices made at the top by the government that have limited Parliament's time to be able to deliberate about these things for considerations that were quite separate from the exigencies of the pandemic. Then I'd just like to offer up that I appreciate the sense of urgency that a lot of people are feeling, particularly in the hardest hit sectors. We, of course, recognize there are a lot of people who don't work in those sectors, who have not been able to maintain their employment or to get back into the workforce in ways that allow them to put food on the table that are not considered in this legislation. We also recognize that there are people in the industries that the government will admit are still hard hit, whether that's tourism, hospitality, arts and culture, who also are not well served by this bill. Talk to any of them who have been getting by on the CRB as opposed to the wage subsidy. Independent travel agents, for instance, an association representing about 90,000 people who work in just one small part of the travel industry. Only about half of them were receiving help through the wage subsidy through the pandemic. The other half, and it's an industry that's predominantly made up of women, I think the Independent Travel Association's membership is about 85% women, were getting help through the CRB. There's nothing in this legislation that foresees any ongoing help for them. So let's also not kid ourselves that somehow swiftly passing this legislation is going to answer the legitimate needs of people in those hardest hit sectors. And that's part of what we're called upon to discuss here at this committee. And if we do it too quickly and we pass the bill in its current form, we're going to be hanging a lot of those workers out to dry. I think also when we talk about related issues, and a Conservative colleague talked earlier about issues of fraud around the CRB and CERB, and while those are of course of concern, and I think there's some responsibility for Parliament to get to the bottom of what happened there, we also know that there are a lot of really financially vulnerable people who did avail themselves at the behest of government of those programs, who are now being told to pay it back with money that they simply don't have, that they never had. They were never in a position to be able to pay that money back. I think of kids, for instance, who graduated out of foster care in Manitoba and were told by the provincial government that they couldn't apply for social assistance in an economic context in the summer of 2020 when there were no jobs for these 18-year-olds that were transitioning out of care, that don't have a family network to support themselves. And they were told that they couldn't apply for the normal provincial supports unless they applied for CERB, knowing full well that that was a no-fail application process, that they would receive that money. And now the federal government is asking them to pay it back. Well, the provincial government sure isn't going to back pay any social assistance for those kids, and it wouldn't be enough to cover the tab anyway. They're getting left behind, and they're part of why there are many folks calling for a low-income CERB repayment amnesty in Canada. The NDP has been proud to support that call, and that's left completely out of the bill, and something that I think it would behoove us to speak about here at committee. I think of families on the Canada Child Benefit who have found out that, in fact, they weren't receiving pandemic financial assistance. They were getting an advance on next year's benefits that are part of their normal budget. And we haven't seen the government prepared to do anything about that yet. I think of all the many seniors that we've been hearing from across the country. It started first with seniors in my riding, and over the last number of months I've been hearing from seniors from every corner of this country who, again, were eligible to apply for CERB because they worked to top up their GIS and they lost that income. So they did what they were told to do if they needed financial help, which was to apply for CERB. They did that. Now it turns out, again, they weren't actually getting pandemic financial support. They were getting an advance on their next year's guaranteed income supplement. But they weren't told that by government. So that money got spent on dental work, on car repairs, on paying late bills. They're left out of this legislation. So this is a legislation that purports to support people, to leave nobody behind. But it certainly doesn't. In fact, it's a long list of people who are getting left behind by a government and a bill that says that's not what they want to do. So there's certainly a lot to discuss, and we need to find a way to do that in a timely way. But we're only having our first meeting. We've just elected our chair, which is why I do think it would make sense to hold off on setting deadlines for the conclusion of study. It may be that we can come to an expeditious end of this. I think a lot will depend upon the government's willing to acknowledge some of the real problems with their recovery plan that I've just highlighted, and their willingness to address some of those things that aren't so far addressed in this legislation will have a lot to do with the timetable upon which we can pass this legislation. So I would encourage government members on the committee and any members of the government that may be listening to think hard about that and how many more people they're prepared to help in order to make sure that their legislation passes quickly. We're certainly here to make sure that no one gets left behind. And as it stands, we're not there yet. So I think it's premature to be setting deadlines about the passage of the bill.
Point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Blakey, and just...
Point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président.
Yeah.
Oui.
Monsieur Samary.
Juste...
Point of order. Yes, the interpreters have had problems to follow the rhythm of my honorable colleagues, so it might be interesting for people to speak a bit slower.
Just, of course, trying to be expeditious.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Blakey, and thank you, Monsieur Samary. And of course, we do have a lot of work, and we thank our interpreters for the magnificent work that they do. And we do have a lot of work before us. Yes, thank you, interpreters and analysts and the clerk. Just before we go to Mr. Polyev and Mr. Beach, because we've talked a lot about a lot of the work, I just wanted to get some idea from the clerk, Alexandre Roger, and thank you, clerk. In terms of the resources available to us over this week, the next 2 weeks with the House, can you just give us some kind of understanding? And Mr. Beach, I'm sure, will want to speak to this also.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. We have time slots available on Tuesday from 11 to 1, then again from 3:30 to 5:30. On Wednesday afternoon from 3:30 to 5:30, then on Thursday as well. Tuesdays and Thursdays would be the same times, and then on Fridays as well. It's harder to get the meetings in the morning just because there's some MPs that might be on Zoom that might be from the West Coast. Those times can be flexible as well. We might be able to go a little later in the evening or group them together to have a longer, but we'd have to check with the services first. But I know that those time slots are a given.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we do have some opportunity in terms of the days and those hours that we're trying to
Yes.
get some room. Okay, great. So I'm going to go to Mr. Polyev. You're on.
Thank you.
Yep, you have the floor.
I'd like to move an amendment to Mr. Veach's motion, which strikes paragraph F, removing the words that the committee commence clause-by-clause consideration of Bill C-2 no later than Friday, December 10th. By consequence, we would remove E as well, that all amendments to the bill be submitted to the clerk of the committee before 3 p.m. on Thursday, December 9th. Can I speak to that?
Yes, Mr. Polyev.
I would point out here that, just to show how unreasonable the time frame is, we have a minister here on the 9th, according to this motion, and then we're somehow supposed to scramble and write amendments based on her testimony by 3 o'clock, on the same day. I don't even know how that's possible. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, the committee is after 3 o'clock, so we might hear things from her at that meeting. Looking at the schedule here, I think we're on at 3:30 again on Thursday. Do I have that right?
Motion? You do have times?
The timing? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's E states, sorry, am I on? Thank you.
D.
D?
Yeah.
That the committee invite the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance to appear for 2 hours in addition to the length of her opening remarks on Thursday, December 9th, but it doesn't qualify the time.
Right.
It would be whatever the...
Either way, even if it's in the morning, I mean, to have us try to turn around amendments to her bill with less than a day after we've heard the testimony, it's very unreasonable. We'd have to go back to our own policy analysts, talk with drafters, and consult on how best to rectify any flaws with her implementing legislation that we might find during her testimony on that very same day. That's just one problem. I mean, the obvious other problem is that we're end of day Monday. So we got 3 days to figure out how we're going to amend this new legislation. And we have, if there's testimony that makes a compelling case for the flaws in the legislation, we could be down to hours to scramble and fix it. I saw during the pandemic the number of times the government made drafting errors or tried to slip in things that we didn't expect would be there, had nothing to do with the pandemic. And then we caught them last minute. Well, that's difficult if you're rushing legislation through. Let me give you some examples.
Mr. Polyev, I'm just going to interject. The clerk just made me aware that there are spots through the evening, and I understand that the minister would be in the morning.
Right.
Yeah.
Again, on the same day. So even if we identify mistakes from her in that morning, then we're expected to run off and try to fix them in hours. Completely unreasonable. During the pandemic, the Prime Minister said he needed unlimited powers to raise taxes to any level, at any time, for any reason, for 2 years. Well, that was completely unnecessary, as it turned out. But he tried to sneak it in. We saw with a rush Liberal budget, they snuck in an amendment to the criminal code, allowing the government to grant immunity to corporate criminals. And that led us to the SNC-Lavalin scandal. And then we saw
Point of order.
the WE scandal.
Point of order. Yes, Mr. Heath.
Is this
Sorry.
part of
McDonald,
the
Mr. McDonald.
Is this part of the motion discussion, or is this something different?
Yeah, Mr. Polyev, we'd ask that you stick to the motion or to your amendment, and
Right, but I'm building the case for my amendment. You know, we saw, for example, with the rushed approach the government took to legislation during the pandemic, that they gave themselves unlimited powers to spend and grant sums to individual groups. Well, what did we get? $500 million for the WE charity, money that never should have gone out. A group that had paid the Prime Minister's family $500,000. Now, I admit that during the pandemic, it was necessary to push legislation through with unusual haste. But here we are, a year and a half after the first COVID lockdown, and after nearly 6 months of this government closing Parliament, and they now all of a sudden say, they're in a big rush. We've got to scramble. Well, you know, you don't show up for work for 6 months. Don't be surprised if you're behind on your projects, and don't expect your colleagues to clean up the mess for you. So we just take, our view is that let's study this legislation, make sure there's no opportunity for abuse, that we don't waste another $100 million, $200 million, $1 billion on mismanagement or fraud. Let's go through with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that the legislation actually does what the politicians say it does. So I encourage you to support my amendment to remove E and F from the text of the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Polyev. I do have Mr. Beach and then Ms. Zarowitz. Mr. Beach, you'll be speaking to the original motion?
I can probably speak to what I need to speak to through the amendment as well. While I appreciate the comments made by my friend opposite, I would be speaking against this proposed amendment. I think that the urgency of this particular legislation is there. Certainly the businesses and the people that are currently without support due to the expiration of particular benefits are counting on us to do this in an expedited manner. Given what the clerk has just advised us, with 2 meetings available on Tuesday, 1 meeting available on Wednesday, 2 on Thursday, and 1 on Friday, and citing point A from the motion as proposed, that we are willing to have extended meetings, that is the equivalent of more than 3 weeks of review, although compressed to the time period of a week. With regards to a question from my colleague on the other side, with regards to witnesses, I mean, witnesses are determined by this committee, but I can certainly share that I think 2 witnesses is more than appropriate. And I personally would be happy to support that, but it's up to the committee. With regards to the Minister of Heritage, I do not have access to the Minister of Heritage schedule, but I can check with the Minister of Finance, of course. With regards to the availability of the Minister of Finance, I would suggest through my previous work on other committees that there is actually a sincere argument for having departmental officials come in first, having everyone get on the same page with witnesses coming in before the minister is here, so that committee members can refer to witness testimony and have that opportunity with the minister. If the minister is here right up front, that ability doesn't exist, and I found that that has been quite useful in previous committee interventions in terms of finding ways to improve the bill. And I know now for certain that the minister is available on Thursday. I would have to check availability for any other times before that. So colleagues, I think that we have the ability, we have several sophisticated members around this table to get through this legislation in the time that we've outlined here, and I would urge you to vote against this amendment and support the motion as it stands.
Mr. Beach, we've got Ms. Zarowitz, then Mr. Baker, and Mr. Blakey. I know everything's getting tangled up in these.
With both. Anyways, thanks so much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate my colleague, his motion. And again, I want to, one, I agree with all of the comments that my colleague Mr. Beach had made. I was going to make the same comment about that we have over 12 hours of meetings that are being proposed this week in order to properly take the time to meet with witnesses to ensure that we are going through this legislation in a proper way and that there's nothing being hidden in this legislation. I also want to just remind everyone that this legislation actually was made available on November 24th. So it's been available. So if there were motions that are going to be proposed or would have been proposed, I think that won't come necessarily when our minister is here. But I think that there's probably already some thoughts within my colleagues on the opposition bench's minds right now. So I think that this bill, this draft bill, has been has been made available for a couple weeks now. Yes, it is quick. It is not meant in any way to fool anyone. We are going to make ourselves available as much as possible this week to make sure that we are properly looking through this bill. I want to address a number of the comments that my NDP colleague had mentioned, but I'm going to wait until we get out of this motion in order to be able to address it, because I'd like to just stay on point in terms of the proposed amendment to the motion at hand. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Baker and then Mr. Blakey.
Thank you, Chair. So, I think it's important to underline something that Mr. Beach spoke to, which is the amount of time that's available to us to meet if we so choose as a committee. And I think that it's important to remember that. I know it seems like a short period of time because it's a week, but the reality is that the amount of sitting time, the amount of working time is the equivalent of weeks of a committee schedule under normal circumstances. So that's the first thought. So I think there's adequate time for us to do the work we need to do, to ask the questions you need to ask, to hear from the minister, 2 hours in addition to her opening remarks, and Ms. Zarowitz pointed out that the bill's been available for several weeks. But I think the other thing to point out is that just from past experience and observing this committee, some of the members who work on this committee, working in other committees, and the legislative process here in the House of Commons on this legislation or on legislation that wasn't expedited. We've seen that that many of the amendments are prepared and thought about and considered and drafted in many cases before the minister presents. And so I think there's a lot of the work that can be done. I'm speaking to Mr. Piliev's point that we need to wait for the minister before amendments can be drafted. And in my view, in practice, that's not how the committees typically work. Typically, the minister's input is important, of course, and that's important to consider. But much of the work on what those amendments will be is done well in advance. And that input, there's adequate time for that input to be considered, the minister's input to be considered, for those final tweaks of those amendments to be made, whatever those happen to be, if there are any at all. The other thing that I wanted to address is a point that Mr. Puliev made around the fact that he appreciated that during the pandemic we had to act with haste, I think were his words, or something along those lines. And I think that he appreciated that we needed to act with haste then, and presumably that's because people needed supports and they needed them urgently. And under where we are in the pandemic today is such that a smaller group of people need those supports urgently, and this legislation is meant to help that group of people. And so, if we felt that it was important to act with haste in the past, I would suggest that it's important to act with haste now as well. So those are my thoughts, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Mr. Blakey.
Thank you. Maybe just start by reassuring Mr. Baker. I don't know how things work on his side of the aisle, but typically for New Democrats, the study that we do and the witnesses we hear does inform our work on bills, and we're certainly looking forward to the benefit of witness testimony in order to help craft the solutions we think would be most appropriate in the case of this bill. On the case of timing, again, I just want to emphasize I appreciate the sense of urgency for those who will be helped by this bill, but it's obviously a much smaller number than it should be, even within the affected industries. The lack of any kind of CRB-style benefit for people in the hospitality and tourism industry. Leaves a lot of people behind. Puis c'est vrai aussi pour ceux qui travaillent dans le secteur des arts.
For people who are in the arts and culture sector, without having a payment that can get to the independent workers, we have a problem because we don't cover all people.
I think the committee should probably know. I had the opportunity to ask the Associate Minister of Finance when he led off debate on this bill if there was anywhere in Canada between October 23rd, the date that this bill is retroactive to, and now, that would meet the criteria for the Canada Worker Lockdown Benefit, and his answer was quite clearly no. So unless something really significant changes, the government has designed a benefit that applies to no one. No one currently is waiting for the help under the criteria of the Canada Worker Lockdown Benefit. It doesn't apply anywhere in the country at the moment. It has not applied anywhere in the country since October 23rd. So I think members of the committee ought to know that. What I said earlier, and I maintain this, is simply that I think it's premature to set a deadline. We don't have to set one today in order to set a stringent deadline tomorrow. I think that the extent to which the government is willing to make some changes to their approach to the recovery as it's currently put in Bill C2 will have a lot to do with how quickly the bill can move forward. And so I'm not in favor of setting a deadline today, and that's why I'll support the Conservative amendment to strike paragraphs E and F from the motion.
Thanks, Madame Châtel, and then Monsieur Saint-Marie.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think that it's a new legislation. We're talking a lot about amendments to existing legislation. Members of this committee are already familiar with by now, given the structure of this legislation. I think that talking about amendments is important, and we should tackle that issue quickly. So I am all for a very ambitious program. We should not leave Canadians by the wayside or behind because we're not able to provide them with the support. We are where we are right now. We need to act swiftly and show ambition and determination. I understand also that the objective is not at stake here, because what I gather from my colleagues around the table is that we support the objective of supporting Canadians that are still in need before the holiday. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chair. Mr. Saint-Marie? Merci, Mr. Chair. So first meeting, and we have a difficult choice to make. I've heard many good arguments on all sides on the motions. So we're all aware that of the urgency to act. Yes, the government dragged its feet since the election. It took 2 months before we go back to the House. We sit today at the Finance Committee, and everything would have to be done third reading by next Friday for the well-being of companies and people who depend on those subsidies and supports. So do we have to commit and say that by Friday we have to do this clause-by-clause consideration? My colleague from the NDP raised a good point. We assess legislation in the light of the echoes from what we hear from the testimonies, and so that's how we assess bills, factoring in the impact on different groups. So before doing so, we'll have to commit to that deadline, that by Friday. I think it's too restrictive. So this is why I will support the amendment presented by my colleague, Mr. Poliev. But I'd like to remind the committee that for me, it is very important to act swiftly in the consideration of this bill. As my colleague Julie said, we have many hours in front of us this week, and I believe that we'll be able to do a lot. But I don't think that we should tie our hands and say that by Friday we have to be done. Although we are still on the amendment, I'd like to thank Mr. Beach for the answers provided to my questions.
And then Mr. Baker. I'm not sure if I see any other hands after that. Ms.
Okay,
Zerowitz,
thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I just, it's, you know, there's this, at least a desire on my part to be able to say, oh, you know, let's take the time that we need. The reality is that part of the reason that we set these timelines is because the House is set to rise by the end of next week. And so you have to set some timelines if there's going to be some amendments so that we could actually bring it back to the House and actually follow the proper procedure and allow this to pass in the House. So that's the reason we actually have to set a timeline. I want to just, you know, put this on record, and then I want to actually propose a sub-amendment. Look, the emergency measures were always designed to be temporary. They were always designed to be temporary. If you look at the courses as we've been trying to move out of COVID, we've been targeting our supports even more specifically as we've been moving through the different stages of COVID. We know that our economy has shown some positive progress with the number of jobs that have come back. Canada's now recovered over 100% of the jobs lost during the pandemic. GDP growth in 2021 is projected to be 5.7%, and just in the last quarter was 5.4%. We see a lot of businesses coming back on stream. We're being able to go more and more Canadians are being vaccinated, so we see a lot of positive signs. So I say all of this because I think the reality is we have to pivot into more specific supports. I think we also understand the need to be prudent and carefully manage government spending. I'd also say, though, as someone who has a large arts and culture community in my Davenport riding, I care a lot about them being continued to be supported. And I am looking for that type of support which we have promised in our sort of our last election. And I do appreciate that that there are some Canadians. We've learned through the pandemic that some of our supports haven't been as supportive to some Canadians versus others. And I do think that there are a number of measures that our government is currently taking in order to address those issues, like the EI reform that we're looking at right now. And also, I think it's very well recognized the issue with seniors and GIS and being asked to repay back the CERB. And I think that our Minister of Seniors has committed to actually addressing this issue. But saying all that, and I do believe that it is important for us to have some sort of a timeline and a time frame so that we can pass these supports, because as my colleague Ms. Chattel had mentioned, I think we all appreciate the urgency of getting this passed before we rise for the winter break due to the unpredictable nature of the current public health situation and the unpredictability of COVID. So here is the sub-amendment that I would like to propose, that we eliminate F, but that E says the following: that proposed amendments be submitted to the clerk at the end of the day, Thursday, December 9th. So it gives us more time than the 3 p.m. on Thursday. It gives us right to the end of the day. It provides us more flexibility. So again, that is to eliminate F and to E is rewritten to say the following: that proposed amendments be submitted to the clerk at the end of the day, Thursday, December 9th.
Thank you, Ms. Zerowitz. This is a sub-amendment to the amendment. Yes, okay. Okay, sub-amendment to the amendment. Now we've got, next is, we've got Mr. Baker and then Mr. Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll speak to Ms. Zerowitz's sub-amendment, and I think what Ms. Zerowitz has proposed is very thoughtful. I mean, basically, she's incorporating part of what Mr. Polyev proposed, which is basically eliminating the deadline for clause by clause, but still trying to make sure that we get to that clause by clause in a reasonable period of time, in an expeditious period of time. I think that gives us the flexibility as a committee to address something that Mr. Polyev raised, which is the importance of not having to rush to the clause by clause, but ensures that we as MPs do our work as quickly as possible to prepare for that clause by clause. I think that's a reasonable ask of all of us here. It gives us enough time. It allows us to hear from the minister. It allows us to hear from other witnesses. While I'm speaking to witnesses, I'll just mention that je suis complètement d'accord.
I totally concur with what Mr. Sainte-Marie said when it comes to the number of witnesses. It's what you said is reasonable, but now with regards to the work we have ahead of us, it's important to find the right balance. I don't think it would be reasonable that the committee decide to work expeditiously or at the normal speed when we don't have this kind of bill. So I cannot go back and say to my constituents that there's a process that would take weeks or months, and in the meantime, there's no support for you.
Je comprends, j'entends les.
At the same time, I understand what my colleagues are saying. We need to examine the bill. We need to hear from the minister, and we need to hear from witnesses that are affected by this. I think that what Ms. Zerowitz proposed is a good balance, and it takes into account what Mr. Poilievre and others have said. And I would also like to clarify with regards to the minister, in response to Mr. Blakey, I wasn't saying that what the minister and the witnesses have to say isn't important. I was just saying that in the process of preparing amendments, usually we start by preparing them. We start drafting them, and then after hearing from the minister and witnesses, we can make modifications to them. I just wanted to say that we have the time to do that. And I think that Ms. Zerowitz's change gives us even more time to do this. And I think that, and I can't speak on behalf of Ms. Zerowitz, but I believe that this takes into account what you said, and it also factors in the importance of having time for amendments. But it also allows us to work quickly. Thank you.
Next up is Mr. Stewart, Mr. Chambers, Mr. McLean.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I supported Mr. Poilievre's amendment, but now on the sub-amendment, it's only adding a few extra hours. And you see, one of the issues that's important to my constituents and to the people of the country here is that a lot of the money from these pandemic benefits bled into prisoners and criminal enterprise, which was noted at this committee in July of 2020. So for some time, it was known that potentially money went into those groups, and then eventually it was basically all but proven. So as a government, as an opposition, we requested to the government in writing to do a full audit and investigation, and there's been no agreement from the government to do that. So now they're trying to shovel this through as fast as they can when the whole country is wondering where those pandemic benefits went to. It's not fair to Canadians to spend a few short days on billions of dollars of money when there's already potential hundreds of millions that actually bled into criminals. So I mean, I don't think the government is very serious about finding out where that money went, because the last thing we need in this country is criminal organizations benefiting from free money from the Government of Canada. So I don't support the sub-amendment, and I think that it's another example of the current government trying to get away from oversight. We've seen that from this government through and through for the last couple of years. This is just yet another example of it. So I'm not in favor of the sub-amendment. I am in favor of the amendment, though, that Mr. Poilievre. Thank you. I'm in favor of yours.
Mr. Chambers?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yours is good.
Thank you to my colleague who acknowledged that the paragraph F may be problematic and we may be able to dispense with that, but at least on the sub-amendment, I mean, we must acknowledge that we're adding not a couple hours, 1 hour to the opportunity to make amendments, because the standing order suggests, committee order suggests the end of the day is 4 p.m. So I'm not really sure that that would count as much of an extension. And when we're discussing amendments, it takes sometimes weeks or longer to identify challenges with pieces of legislation. So adding an extra hour, I don't think would solve any of those challenges. And I, remain relatively unpersuaded by some of the arguments with respect to minister's schedule. If the minister would like to see this bill and the government see it pass, I think the minister would make themselves available at any time, not just what we seem to understand them to be available this week. So I respectfully would not support the sub-amendment and revert back to the amendment of Mr. Poilievre. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, I was going to actually go to you, Ms. Zarowitz, just if you can clarify end of day for everyone.
So end of day for me would be midnight.
Midnight.
Midnight. It would not be 4 o'clock. It would be that we had the whole rest of Thursday to be able to entertain any motions, meet with any witnesses, deliberate, debate, dialogue, question, do whatever we need to. But end of day, Thursday, December 9th.
Okay.
So that means midnight.
Midnight. Thank you. And Mr. McLean.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I've listened to all my colleagues around the table here, particularly Ms. Zarowitz and Mr. Baker, about why we need to move forward with what might be a slightly elongated schedule. But I'll go back to what I repeated here, and I don't think anybody has actually drawn out a schedule here of what we have to go through. Nobody's actually blocked it off. Here's where we do this, here's where we go through. It's merely arriving, in my opinion, from everything I've heard today, here's when we need to have this done, so forget about everything that's going to transpire in the meantime. Let's just get this done by this date. We'll fudge that as we go through the process here. This is not just a process you just arrive at the end. You've got to go through listening to the witnesses, considering their input, and actually providing the clause by clause after that point in time once you consider what they've said. And right now we don't even have a list of the witnesses we're going to consider, let alone what the minister's going to say. And the minister's known about this, I should point out, for quite some time. So the minister could have scheduled this in to move this very quickly a long time ago and didn't do so. And this committee should have been set up quite some time ago as well. So jamming this in because we've got a sudden and self-imposed deadline where we haven't blocked off actually who's going to be doing what when, I think is a charade. And with all due respect, everything we hear in this committee, this is democracy. We're here to actually listen to what people say and consider what is going to happen with this bill and how this bill can be better when it comes out the other end, that we refer to the Senate, who is also going to take their own process with it at that point in time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. See anybody else on the speakers list? No? Okay, so we have right now, Mr. Clerk, it's we've got a motion, an amendment, and a sub-amendment for this. And any clarification in terms of the timelines? Was that structured into the motion, like what was happening on what day and how long that would take? I didn't get a copy actually of the motion because Mr. McLean had some, oh, thank you very much. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, perhaps I could humbly suggest that we have a vote on the sub-amendment while you read the motion.
Sure, Mr. Blakey, we could do that. Okay, so we'll go to the sub-amendment and call the vote.
The vote is on the sub-amendment of Ms. Derowitz. Mr. Baker? In favor. Mr. Beach? In favor. Madame Châtel? In favor. Ms. Derowitz?
In favor.
Mr. McDonald?
In favor.
Mr. Chambers?
No.
Mr. McLean?
Opposed.
Mr. Polyev?
Against.
Mr. Stewart?
Against.
Monsieur Sainte-Marie?
Contre.
Mr. Blakey? Yeas pour 5, 5. Nays contre 6, 6.
So the sub-amendment is defeated. Now to the amendment.
Mr. Baker?
Opposed.
Mr. Beach?
Opposed.
Madame Châtel?
Contre.
Ms. Derowitz?
Contre.
Mr. McDonald?
Opposed.
Mr. Chambers?
In favor?
Mr. McLean?
En faveur.
Mr. Polyev?
For.
Mr. Stewart?
In favor.
Monsieur Sainte-Marie?
Pour.
Mr. Blakey?
In favor.
Yeas pour 6, 6. Nays contre 5, 5.
Okay, so the amendment passes. And now we go to the motion. No. Oh, sorry. Well, who had their hand up first? Let's see.
Daniel.
Mr. Blakey?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. I wonder if the committee has a preference as to whether or not we invite the minister to appear in person or not. Of course, in the last Parliament, many of us served prior to the vaccination campaign in the context of a hybrid Parliament, and I think missed the opportunity to be able to pose questions to ministers in person. And of course, we have a hybrid Parliament available again for when we need it, but the context is clearly different, as we can see even just by today's in-person attendance at the meeting. And I think, for my part anyway, I would like to suggest that the committee do express a preference that the minister appear in person by amending paragraph D to add after the word appear the words in person, so that it would read that the committee invite the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance to appear in person for 2 hours in addition to the length of her opening remarks on Thursday, December 9th.
Right. There's an amendment on the floor to change D to after the Minister of Finance to appear, adding in person. Any discussion yet? Mr. Beach?
So I think we can do this. My concern, of course, would be if some sort of circumstance happened where the minister had to isolate or the like. I wouldn't want this to stop the minister from being able to appear at committee. But certainly, if the committee prefers to have the minister in person, that's something that we can put forward. I just think we certainly don't want to have a case where she's not able to visit the committee.
I think we're agreed. I would come back, Mr. Chair, if I might have the floor, to a point I made earlier, which is just that it is our first day. We're having preliminary conversations. So whether it's about deadline for amendments or deadline for passage of the bill, or the very good point that Mr. Beach has raised, which is that if it were absolutely impossible for the minister to appear in person, but she were nevertheless able to appear through the hybrid format. These are all things that we can discuss as those things come up. But I don't think the onus is on the committee today to answer all of the potential possibilities that may come up. We're obviously trying to study a bill as quickly as we can. I think everybody has recognized that there is some pressure, even if we may disagree as to the reasons for that pressure to get the legislation passed quickly. But we're on our first day. There are a lot of variables that have yet to be defined. And I think for the moment, expressing a preference that the minister come in person is the beginning of that conversation. It sounds to me like we'll be meeting frequently over the course of this week and would have the opportunity to reconsider this decision in the event that the minister were completely unable to appear here in person.
Thank you, Mr. Blakey. I just informed by the clerk, the House rules are that witnesses in the way that we are conducting business today are not appearing in person. And even though the minister is a member of Parliament, the minister then would be appearing as a witness. So that would not abide by the House rules. That's my understanding, Mr. Clerk. Yes.
So just to make sure that I understand clearly then, the motion that was passed in the House for the hybrid parliament would prohibit ministers appearing in person at committee. And it's not within the power of the committee to make any alteration to that or to suggest to the minister that if she wanted to appear in person that she could do so?
So my understanding from the clerk is any witness. So if somebody is appearing as a witness, as the minister would be, they would be captured under those rules.
Point of order?
Yes. Mr. Polyev.
Committees are their own masters. And so committees can set any rule they want. And as a result, I will be supporting Mr. Blakey's motion, which is in order.
Even though committees are masters of their own proceedings, that they cannot override what has happened in the House. So the House rules, the standing procedures, as the clerk has explained, do override the committees. So yes, all witnesses cannot appear before the committee in person. Yes, Mr. Polyev.
Unless Mr. Blakey wanted to go on further.
It's all right. Go ahead, Pierre. I'll see if there's anything.
I had another consideration. I don't know if Mr. Chambers wants to pursue this as well, but to ask the Minister of Finance to defend a $7 billion bill that's being pushed through this committee, we're being given a compressed timeline. For her to do that in 2 hours, I think, is asking a lot. There are going to be many questions about this bill and its impact on inflation, the financial risks of adding another $7 billion to our already $1.2 trillion debt, the tax increases that the minister is considering to pay for all this spending. These questions all require answers before parliamentarians can vote on it. I don't think 2 hours is enough time to get those answers. And so I would like to open up the possibility, and perhaps Mr. Chambers, whose idea this was, would like to address it if he could get on the floor. But, I would just conclude my remarks by saying, from those to whom much is given, much is asked.
So I know Mr. Blakey, and then we had a point of order. Then did we have anybody else before Mr. Chambers? Yeah, I think, was it Mr. Baker, were you up? Okay, Mr. Chambers, and then Mr. Baker.
Thank you, Chair. So as Mr. Polyev rightly pointed out, I think there's a lot of material to get through and some very big questions that we would like answers for. So perhaps we would move a sub-amendment to go from 2 hours to 4 hours for consideration to Mr. Blakey's proposal. Thank you.
Sub-amendment for 4 hours for the minister. And now I've got Mr. Baker and Ms. Zerowitz.
Thank you, Chair. So I want to make a couple of points in response to this proposal by Mr. Polyev and Mr. Chambers. The first one is that I think 2 hours provides a significant amount of time for those questions to be answered, that, the topics to be covered that Mr. Poilievre spoke to. I think that when you think about, the routine motions that we just passed and how much time each member of the committee will have, and I think 2 hours is pretty substantial. I've only been an MP for 2 years, but, I've watched, I've been in my past participation in other committees, it was felt that 2 hours was a significant amount of time by the minister, whether that be, and I'm not just talking about how government members felt about it, but how opposition members felt about it. So to me, 2 hours is significant. And I think the input that, that Monsieur Saint-Marie, that Mr. Blakey, that others have spoken about that they would want to hear from the minister on, they could obtain in that 2 hour period. The second thing is, and someone can correct me if I'm mistaken, but my understanding was that the 2 hours, the time period of 2 hours allocated to the minister's appearance was agreed to by all parties, like in the House. That this was passed as part of a House motion. Please correct me if I'm wrong about that. But that was something that all members agreed to in the House itself. And so obviously when that motion was passed, after agreement and presumably discussion about various aspects of that motion, that was something that all parties felt was reasonable. So I think my question would be, why did we think it was reasonable then and we don't think it's reasonable now? Sure.
Thank you. Ms. Zerowitz and then Mr. Beach.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And I'll just continue along the excellent comments that my colleague mentioned. I'll also mention, as I think it's been pointed out a number of times, we have a bill that's before us, a piece of legislation before us that I think we all agree is important for us to pass as expeditiously as possible and as responsibly as possible. It is important for the minister to come here. It is important for the minister to be addressing questions related to this piece of legislation. I would say to you that as important as inflation and a number of other items that we could be speaking to the minister about is super important. I think that it's important for us to stay focused on this bill for all the reasons that we were talking about, the need to ensure that we are asking the right questions, taking the time for this legislation, focusing on this legislation, and I think sort of going beyond the scope of this legislation is not advisable at this moment. I think there'll be other opportunities to be addressing some of the bigger questions around our finances, around our economy in the coming weeks and months. But I think that it's important for us to stay focused on this legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And Mr. Beach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You have the floor, yes.
Well, thank you for those points from my colleagues. I would just emphasize again how important it is going to be for the sake of our businesses right across this country, for people right across the country that are going to rely on these benefits. It was with haste that a unanimous motion came from the House to get this particular piece of legislation in front of this committee so that we could operate expeditiously. It sounds like we have agreement to meet as often and as necessary to get this done. But as my colleague mentioned, there is also a Senate process that has to get through, and I'm unwilling to, go away at Christmas not having these benefits in place, given the fact that we have another variant. We don't know exactly what's going to happen between the House rising over Christmas and us coming back. And I think it's essential that the minister come in. I think if we're well organized, the 2 hours will be enough in order to get the substantive information that all colleagues around this table deserve. And then we can move on to whatever amendments that are appropriate at that time.
Monsieur Samay.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. La motion adoptée.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The motion adopted in the House says that the minister must appear in our committee for at least 2 hours. So that means for 2 hours, but it could be more. That's how it's written. There we have 2 weeks for our committee in the House to adopt C2. So time is limited. I thank you, our clerk, to have shown us the different times that we can meet this week. I think other committees will also sit next week. And I agree with Mr. Chambers and Mr. Poilievre that say that we have lots of questions to ask of the minister. However, at this stage, I'd rather we limit ourselves at 2 hours of questioning, and after that, if we judge that this isn't enough, we could convene the minister for another 2-hour period to answer our questions. So at this stage, I think I will vote against the amendment. But I would leave the door open for further interrogation because of the important timeline, the short timeline we have. So the minister would come, answer questions for 2 hours, and then we should see if there is a possibility of convening her once more for another 2-hour period. Thank you.
No? So we will call the vote.
The vote is on the sub-amendment to bring in the minister for 4 hours. Mr. Baker?
Opposed.
Mr. Beach? Opposed. Madame Châtel?
Opposed.
Ms. Derowitz?
Contre.
Mr. McDonald?
Opposed.
Mr. Chambers?
For.
Mr. McLean?
For.
Mr. Poilievre?
For.
Mr. Stewart?
For.
Monsieur Sainte-Marie?
Contre.
Mr. Blakey?
In favor.
So it doesn't pass.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Poilievre.
I understand that. Do we have the count on that? Is it a tie? No, jeez. Because I heard Ms. Irwich say it was a tie, and I thought I was just going to see if you wanted any advice on your tie-breaking vote. I suppose not.
No.
I apologize.
Okay. Any further discussion? No. Okay, we're at the to the motion. Oh. Okay. We'll call the vote.
The vote is on the main motion as amended. Mr. Baker?
Pardon me, on a point of order before the vote starts. Now, my impression was that we had just voted on a Conservative sub-amendment to my original amendment, which would mean that we would have a vote on the amendment before having a vote on the main motion.
Clerk, if you could just drill down on that. So we just voted on the amendment for 4 hours for the minister to appear for 4 hours.
Yes, that was Mr. Blakey's amendment.
That was Mr. No.
My amendment was to add in person following the word attend. And then there was a Conservative sub-amendment moved to my amendment.
Actually,
we haven't yet had a vote on the amendment.
If I can just clarify, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Clerk.
The amendment for Mr. Blakey was ruled out of order by the chair, so it wasn't an amendment. Therefore,
It wasn't clear to me that the amendment was ruled out of order. Those are magic words that we need to hear. I would gladly challenge the chair on that had I known that it was the appropriate time to do so.
It was out
but
of
I
order,
thought
yes,
that
Mr. Blakey.
question had been superseded by the Conservative sub-amendment and was leaving that until now, which is why I raised the issue.
Okay, I did confer with the clerk, and that's how I saw it, that it was out of order.
Sure. Well, I would take this moment to respectfully challenge the chair. I do think that notwithstanding the content of the motion and this committee's powers to supersede that or lack thereof, I do think that the committee ought to be able to express its preferences and that it's not out of order for the committee to express a preference and that it's important for the government to hear that preference because there may well be future negotiations or modifications to the nature of the hybrid parliament. And my desire for this committee would be that it would reinforce the idea that going forward, when ministers are called to testify at committee, that we would see them appear in person whenever possible. And this is an opportunity to begin that work. of making that impression on the government. And it's in that spirit, Mr. Chair, that I challenge your ruling.
Well, it's a fair point. It was captured in terms of your remarks, but as far as the House has ruled that witnesses would not appear before the committee in person.
So shall we have a vote on the challenge to the chair then, which is within my prerogative to do as a member?
Here, we can have that vote.
The question.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair. Just a question of clarification. The question on the main question had been called and was proceeding, and then this point of order was kind of interjected as the question was already being called. So I just pass it over to you on whether these point of orders are in order, or if we're supposed to complete the question and then move on to business.
Clerk.
Et à ce sujet, j'aurais un point d'ordre aussi.
I also have a point of order.
Well, it is right that Mr. My understanding understood that it had been called. The question had been called at the time, and so Mr. Blakey, it's something we've captured your sentiment on record, but I feel that it had been called.
Point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président. J'en appelle.
Point of order. This is not the understanding I was under. I thought that we had to vote on my colleague motions, because I would also support the fact that we should invite the Heritage Minister. So I was waiting for my colleague's motion to be voted on before presenting my own motion to invite the Heritage Minister of Heritage. So I would appeal your decision, Mr. Chair.
And I guess we'll go against the House order.
Oh, merci.
This committee in particular? So we are going to let the vote go forward in terms of the challenge, and what this will allow for is the House to clarify its rules. So, call the vote.
What we're voting on?
Mr. Clerk, if you can clarify.
My understanding is that there was a question to go against what the chair had ruled, and the chair said that the question was put by the comment of Mr. Beach, and Mr. Sainte-Marie wanted to overturn that decision so that Mr. Blakey could then overturn the original decision of the chair.
Exactement.
In other words, I believe what we're about to vote on is a challenge to the chair's ruling that my amendment was out of order. If you agree that it's out of order, you would vote to sustain the chair's ruling. If you disagree that my amendment was out of order, you would vote to overturn the chair's ruling. Does that sound right to you, Mr. Chair?
So, if I'll again look to the clerk to bring clarity to all of this.
Mr. Blakey is correct. The question is, shall the decision of the chair be sustained? So if you are in agreement with the chair's decision, you vote yes. And if you don't agree with the chair's decision, you vote no. Are we ready to vote?
Ready to vote.
Mr. Baker?
In favor.
Mr. Beach? Madame Châtel?
En faveur.
Ms. Derowitz?
In favor.
Mr. McDonald? Mr. Chambers?
Overturn.
Mr. McLean?
Overturn.
Mr. Poiliev?
Overturn.
Mr. Stewart?
Overturn.
Mr. Sainte-Marie?
Contre.
Mr. Blakey?
Against.
Yeas pour 5-5, nays contre 6-6.
Okay, so it doesn't pass.
Right, clerk? Right. So we challenge the decision, so it was overturned, yes.
Okay, so what do we have before us now? Is it just the... That's what the motion Okay, so we will now move to the main motion. So members, now we have the main motion before us? Is it the main amendment,
Vote on
clerk,
the
or the main
amendment.
motion?
It's the amendment to have for 4 hours instead of 2.
Yes.
No, the 4 hours is already been voted against. It's the amendment on the in-person.
In person, okay. Okay.
Okay, call the vote.
No, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Beach.
Sorry, could we just have
Sorry.
the language for the preference restated?
The language that I moved earlier was to add the words "in person" after the word "appear" in paragraph D.
And then through discussion, a friendly amendment, the preference of in-person?
I'm open to that change, that the committee express its preference so that a less flexible reading of the amended paragraph wouldn't prevent the minister from appearing.
How does this override the House rules, or will it? So what will happen now?
The motion that was adopted on November 25th about meetings on Zoom for committees and the House states specifically that that witnesses have to appear via teleconference, and so the committee would be going against the House rules at this point.
The committee would be going against. It doesn't mean that a witness would go against those House rules.
No.
Mr. Blakey.
In the spirit of friendly amendment, one of the things that I would suggest that I think would only really be possible with unanimous consent of the committee would be to strike the wording of my original amendment, given the discussion and the advice from the clerk that we've had, and replace it instead by adding at the end of paragraph D, and that the committee express its preference for the minister to appear in person. I think that way there's no question that it could be read in a way that would prevent her from appearing otherwise, given the content of the motion that the House has passed for a hybrid parliament, and that I think would meet the objections of my Liberal colleagues, but I think also allow us to have an important precedent in terms of how Parliament ought to conduct itself in this new space where the circumstances are a bit different than they were at the beginning of the pandemic. We're still trying to navigate our way through the balance of the pandemic, and we're clearly going to learn some things as we go.
Okay, thank you for that friendly amendment. Mr. McLean?
Well, I do note, and I have read the witness list here, and I appreciate Mr. Blakey's intervention here to make sure that the minister is invited to appear in person. But it does say members may participate either in person, and I'm sure the Minister of Finance is a member.
The minister is a member. My understanding, again, from the clerk is, yes, as a member, the minister would be able to appear, but as a witness, I guess once the...
So could we say that in this case that there's some gray area in here, and that the minister appearing as a member of the House of Commons, where she appears most days so far, that she should also be appearing here as a member, as a witness, who we're seeing in the House of Commons on a daily basis as well.
Yeah, it's the terminology, right? So... So, point is that members do wear different hats at different times. Be it MP, minister, witness. Mr. Beach, did you?
I just asked to call the question.
Oh, call the question, yes.
If we could, before we call that, I just want to ensure that we did have unanimous consent for the change to the amendment that I proposed, so we're clear on what we're voting on.
Yep. Do you want to repeat at the end of D, you said?
Yeah, so that the initial language that I proposed would be struck, and then we would add at the end, and that the committee express its preference for the minister to appear in person.
Okay, everybody's clear, so we'll call the question.
Mr. Baker.
In favor?
Mr. Beach.
In favor?
Madame Châtel.
Pour.
Ms. Derowitz.
Pour.
Mr. McDonald.
In favor.
Mr. Chambers.
For.
Mr. McLean.
En faveur.
Mr. Polyev.
In favor.
Mr. Stewart.
In favor.
Monsieur Sainte-Marie.
Pour.
Mr. Blakey.
In favor.
Yeas pour 11, 11. Nays contre 0.
All in favor, great, passes. Monsieur Sainte-Marie?
Oui. Bon, merci, monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to propose an amendment to the main motion. To ask for the Heritage Minister to appear earlier. I'm open to any formulation or drafting suggestions. We could replicate what's under D, and so that the committee invites the Heritage Minister to appear for 2 hours in addition to the length of his opening remarks. And we could leave the same date, Thursday, December 19th. It could be at the same time as the Finance Minister.
To have the Heritage Minister also appear. There's an amendment. Any discussion?
What's the language, sorry, that we're inviting the minister?
Monsieur Sainte-Marie, the language?
Oui.
Kelly Libellé, the same as under D. The same wording, that the committee invite the Heritage Minister to appear for 2 hours in addition to the length of his opening remarks on Thursday, December 9th. And we could add the same hours as the Finance Minister. So the same wording.
I had Ms. Derowitz. I'm not sure if you had some comments, and then Mr. Blakey.
Maybe just one comment. I hear the language. I just wonder why it would be the same amount of time as the Minister of Finance. Is it just for simplicity's sake that you're trying to do that and just, get that in? just because it seems a little extraordinary for 2 hours with the Minister of Heritage. Okay, that's the only question I have.
Mr. Blakey?
Merci. Pour moi, je voulais juste...
I'm very open to the idea of inviting the Heritage Minister. There's also the Tourism Minister that could be invited, but I don't want the Heritage Minister come here at the same time as the Minister of Finance. We just had a conversation on this as on the amount of time we need with the Finance Minister. If we have two ministers at the same time, that would leave us only 1 hour with the Finance Minister, so that's not enough if we were to divide their time. So I'm not in a position to support a motion that provides for the ministers to be here at the same time. But if they were to be invited at different times, then would be in a position to support that amendment.
Mr. Baker?
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je voulais demander...
I had a question for Mr. Sainte-Marie. Perhaps I missed your answer, but Mr. Sainte-Marie, could you explain why it is important to invite the Heritage Minister during this in this committee? I also have the same question as Mrs. Zeres. I also aware, and I share with the committee, I am aware of the discussion we just had in terms of having enough time to work on this bill, and I'm aware that if the Heritage Minister come to appear, it could take up time that we won't have with the Finance Minister and time that we won't have to work on the bill.
Donc, merci à Julie et à Monsieur Yvan.
Thank you, Julie and Yvan, for your comments, and Daniel as well. I used the same wording as in D. It can be a different wording. I'll come back to that in a minute. Why does the minister have to come testify? Because in Bill C2, we're continuing with the wage subsidy and the rent subsidy, and we want to support tourism and culture. In the culture section, most workers are freelance workers. And they will no longer have any support. So in the first negotiations that we had with the minister, we said we can't forget these people because culture in Quebec, the culture sector in Quebec is so important. We don't want those people to have to go into other sectors and weaken the cultural sector. So we want the government to say whether or not they have a solution for these people. And I say the Heritage Minister because it would be the responsibility of his department. So he could explain it, and then we could examine his suggestion and speak to freelance cultural workers so that we can ensure that here at the committee that it all makes sense. So I could make a friendly amendment, if that would be okay with everyone. I could say that it could be 1 hour instead of 2 hours. We could remove the date of December 9th to give us to give more time to the minister. But I want us to agree here that it doesn't have to be at the same time as Minister Freeland. So, if I re-examine the formulation, it will be similar to letter D, but with some modifications, so that the committee invite the Minister of Heritage to appear for 1 hour in addition to the length of his opening remarks, period. And it's not going to be at the same time as the Minister of Finance, or that it doesn't take any time from her speech and her responses to our questions. I hope that works for everyone. Thank you.
Amendment, Mr. Polyev.
Seule précision.
Only one thing. We would like to have both ministers at different times. So 2 hours with the Minister of Finance and 2 or another hour, 1 hour at another time for the Minister of Heritage.
The amendment.
Je pense que c'est un amendement.
I think it's a friendly amendment.
Yeah. Did I see another hand go up? Yep. Mr. Baker and Ms. Zarowitz.
Merci, M. Saint-Marie, pour.
Thank you, Monsieur Saint-Marie.
Je comprends.
I understand the importance of the issues that you have raised. I understand that it is important to you to ask these questions on this topic. However, I believe that there are people in other sectors that are also impacted by the bill. Maybe it's Mr. Blakey who would raise this, but we could ask ministers or witnesses from other sectors to testify. I believe that the Minister of Finance is responsible for this bill. And I think that through her testimony, she could respond to the questions that you have raised. So, I believe that we can accomplish what you're seeking to accomplish by asking questions of the person responsible, who, in this case, is the Minister of Finance for this bill. So that's my opinion.
Mr. Blakey and Ms. Chattel, and then Ms. Zarowitz.
Oui, je remercie.
Sorry. I would like to thank Mr. Baker for his comments. Unfortunately, I don't agree. The program that is proposed to support workers in the culture sector would come from the Department of Heritage. And it's so important to support these workers, and that would impact our support at the report stage and the third reading stage. Because this bill could be put forward by the Heritage Minister and he was in communication with the different sectors, I think it is important that he come to explain it publicly to us and to Canadians. And we want clear and specific commitments and the confirmation from the organizations that are represented that it is a good enough bill and that we can support it. I think that we absolutely need to hear from this minister, and it will impact our vote in the long run. Thank you.
Tell Ms. Zarowitz.
Peut-être pour renforcer cette point.
Just to reinforce what was said, I think that the question was asked a couple times in the House already. I raised issues for the culture sector with this bill. The finance minister, in her responses, said that it's up to the Minister of Heritage to develop a new program for self-employed people in the culture sector. So, because we have the precedent of the Minister of Finance saying that she would be asking the Minister of Heritage to implement this, that it would make sense to hear directly from the Minister of Heritage. That is why I support my Bloc colleagues' amendment. Ms. Chattel. Thank you very much. Thank you for this clarification. I think it's clear and it responds to the question that I was going to ask. Because amending the Income Tax Act, this is a responsibility of the Minister of Finance, so I wasn't sure that I understood why there was a link with the Minister of Heritage, but it seems to be a political matter regarding the Bloc and the NDP's position on Bill C2, but it goes outside of the scope of C2. This doesn't change what the committee has to analyze. Mr. Chair, can I respond?
Is it?
Merci, Monsieur
Okay.
le Président.
And then, but is this going to be quick,
Oui, oui.
Monsieur Samari? Oui.
Oui, c'est ça, c'est que
What we were asking with C2, the government was saying that they couldn't put it in C2, but that they would put it in another bill. And we want to ensure that it is the case when we vote for Bill C2, or else Bill C2 will be lacking.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm appreciating the conversation. I had mentioned earlier, and I think those who've been committee members before, I talk a lot about arts and culture in my own community, and so I care a lot about them. For me, though, so when I look at this bill, there are already elements in here around the emergency supports for the arts and culture sector, so particularly around live performances and exhibits, around museums and historic sites. So there are a number of emergency supports. So it's not that it's completely missing just because a lot of our arts and culture actually fit within the tourism and hospitality recovery program. I want to mention that. For me, when I heard the response of our Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance in the House of Commons about supports for individual artists, my understanding is that that is going to be a separate bill. And to me, I feel confident that there is a separate bill and a separate solution that is being worked on right now for individual artists and those working within the cultural sector. I think it's important for us to stay focused on this bill. I think if we start going down the track of who's missing from this bill, we get a little bit off track. I agree that the Minister of Finance will be able to respond to questions around supports for the arts and cultural sector, what's actually included and what isn't included and why it's not included. I do think that that would be possible when we have the Minister of Finance and Deputy Prime Minister come before us. So I just encourage us to stay focused on this bill, to stay focused on moving forward. As mentioned, we have a lot to do this week to make sure that we study this bill appropriately and we make sure we have the right witnesses and that we are evaluating this bill in the right fashion so that we can move forward with it as soon as possible. Am I able, Mr. Chair, to be able to call the question for us to actually do the vote right now?
We can call the question, but there is an amendment, and then there was a friendly amendment from Monsieur Poliev. Yeah, we'll call the question.
The question is on the amendment of Mr. Sainte-Marie to have the Minister of Heritage come before the committee for an hour, not at the same time as the Minister of Finance. Mr. Baker?
Opposé.
Mr. Beach?
Opposed.
Madame Châtel?
Contre.
Ms. Derowitz?
Contre.
Mr. McDonald?
Opposed.
Mr. Chambers?
For.
Mr. McLean?
For.
Mr. Poliev?
For.
Mr. Stewart?
For.
Mr. Sainte-Marie?
pour.
Mr. Blakey?
In favor.
Yes pour 6, nays contre 5, 5.
Passes. Mr. Blakey.
Just a quick procedural point, if I may, Mr. Chair. I know there's been a lot of already in this meeting calling of the question. I sat on PROC in the last Parliament. You may recall, I believe you've had the good fortune to visit us, and there were members who were trying to call the question at that time, and there were a lot of Liberals who really wanted to speak. I think it's just important as we get off on our initial meeting here that we get off on the right foot, just so that there's no misunderstanding that, in fact, the question can't be called in committee debate. So when every member has said their piece, then you can proceed to a vote. But certainly, I think some meetings of the Procedure and House Affairs Committee would have ended much earlier in the last Parliament if members did indeed have the ability to call questions at committee.
Thank you for that. I did ask if there was any further discussion. I didn't see anybody okay, so we did move forward. Okay, so Mr. Clerk, it's just, what is left is just the motion?
As amended.
Yeah, as amended. So the motion as amended, we'll call the question.
Mr. Baker?
In favor.
Mr. Beach?
In favor.
Madame Châtel? Ms. Derowitz?
In favor.
Mr. McDonald?
In favor.
Mr. Chambers?
Debate, okay. We're in favor.
Sorry. Yeah. 4.
Mr. McLean?
4.
Mr. Polyev?
4.
Mr. Stewart?
4.
Monsieur Sainte-Marie?
Pour.
Mr. Blakey?
In favor.
Yes pour 11, 11, nays contre 0.
So the motion as amended passes. Thank you. Is there any further business? Yeah? No? Yep. Any further business from the committee? No? We're looking to adjourn. For adjournment, yes. Everybody in agreement? Great. We're adjourned.